Hello. Let's keep reading the Saturdays. We left off in the middle of Saturday 6, on which Mona, Rush, Randy, and Oliver decided to go to Central Park and have a picnic. They went out on the lake in a boat, and Randy fell out of that boat. When they got back home, they had to sneak Randy inside, get her into some dry clothes, and hang up her wet clothes near the furnace. And when we left the Melendys, Cuffy said she was going to close up the furnace because Willie was sick and wasn't there, but Rush said, no, let me do it, to try to cover for Randy. And that is where we pick up. At last, all the good nights had been said, all the doors closed, all the teeth brushed. The night wind sucked into the window shades and then blew them out again with a sighing sound. Sometime in the night, Rush half awoke to hear a thunderous downpour of rain, and the sound of Cuffy closing windows all over the house. He just had time to get Isaac under the bed and sink into deep, simulated slumber himself, when Cuffy came into his room and closed the window. He could hear her clicking her tongue and muttering, "Teeming, it's simply teeming." Why do people always say it teems when it rains hard? Rush wondered drowsily, and went to sleep again. It was the deepest, darkest sleep he had ever had. For hours there wasn't even a dream in it, and then at last there was a dream. Far, far away, a dog was barking. In his dream, Rush could see it, a tiny dog sitting in a lighted doorway at the end of a long passage. Funny how clearly I can see it at this distance, thought Rush in his dream. It must be at least a mile away, and yet I can even see the little freckled places on its muzzle. "Be quiet," Rush said to the dog. "Be quiet, let me go in peace. I want to go away without any noise." But instead of being quiet, the tiny dog suddenly expanded and grew enormous, big as a house, towering above Rush, and his barking was terrible, unbearable, and overwhelming. Rush opened his eyes wearily. It took him several minutes to realize that it was Isaac who was barking. Isaac, what's the matter?" Rush's words came out slowly. He felt queer, as though he was still in the dream. Isaac continued to bark. "Oh, do please shut up," begged Rush. "All I want to do is get back to sleep, and how can I if you make such a racket?" Isaac paid no attention. He ran to the closed door and barked again, barking all the time in a shrill, nervous way as though he were afraid. "It's strange he doesn't seem to have wakened anyone," wondered Rush. "I'd have thought Cuffy would be in here long before this, giving us both the dickens." His arm felt heavy as lead as he searched for the light switch. "What's that funny smell?" His heart began to beat a little faster with an unknown fear, though still heavily, laboriously, as though he were carrying a burden up a hill. His hand found the switch, and the room sprang into light. Everything looked the same. The big tin alarm clock ticked loudly, like his own heart, and its severe black hands both pointed to 3. There was the pile of tattered scores, and a tennis racket, and the 9 big airplane models, and the bookcase with all its litter of books. There were his clothes, his empty socks hanging sadly over the chair arm, and his shoes on the floor, one upright and one toppled on its side. Everything just as usual. Yet was it? There was that funny smell. There was that heavy feeling in his chest, and the way he saw everything so clear and yet so distant. There was Isaac's barking. Rush swung his legs over the edge of the bed. When he sat up straight, he felt queerer than ever. "That smell," Rush said out loud to the frenzied Isaac. "I know that smell, but I can't think what it is." For some reason, he began to think of a movie he had seen several years ago. Again he saw the hero fallen forward across the papers on his desk. "What's the matter? Why did he die?" he'd asked Mona, and Mona had said, "Are there any more caramels in that bag? He's dead of coal gas. His wife put too much coal on the fire." Like a diver on the ocean floor, Rush staggered clumsily to the door and pulled it open. The smell was terrible. Everything looked the same, and yet he knew that an evil power was coiling through the house like some invisible venomous serpent. He hurried past Father's empty room and down the stairs, banging at Cuffy's door, and when there was no answer, he hurried in and threw open both the windows. "Cuffy! Cuffy!" he called urgently, shaking her plump shoulder. "What's the matter?" said Cuffy at last. "Why in the world are you hollerin' so? Look out, don't knock over my teeth." She reached down for the tumbler. "Hurry, hurry!" cried Rush. "It's coal gas. The house is full of it. Get Oliver awake and take him outdoors." What in the world? Why is Isaac barking so? Coal gas? Cuffy, awake at last, sprang out of bed in her huge white nightgown. "Where are the girls?" But Rush was already in their room, opening the windows and calling them. The window shades stood out flat on the draft. Rain streamed in, and the city odor of damp and soot and wet cement was like the breath of heaven itself. "Mona, Mona, Mona!" shouted Rush. "Get up, get up! We're being suffocated to death." "Oh, I don't care. I want to sleep," begged Mona, and buried her head under her pillow. She wanted to sleep more than she had ever wanted anything in the world, to sink deeper and deeper into this velvety, fathomless, dreamless sleep. "Wake up! Wake up!" bawled Rush in a voice like iron as he pulled the pillow away. "Coal gas, I tell you! Wake up!" Mona opened her eyes. Oh, how hard it was. How horrible to come back again. "My head hurts so terribly," she wailed. "Coal gas? You mean like in that Paul Mooney picture we saw?" "That's right. That's what made me know what it was. That and Isaac. Hurry up, Mona. Put on some shoes and a coat. You'll have to help me with Randy. I can't get her to wake up." Mona was ready in an instant. She bundled Randy into a coat and socks. Shoes took too long. "Shake her some more, Rush." Mona's voice was breathless with fear. "Oh, Rush, do you suppose... Is her heart beating?" "Of course it is, you idiot." Rush sounded angry, but he sounded scared, too. "Here, help me." He slung the limp little figure of Randy over his shoulder and began to go downstairs. Cuffy had turned on all the lights and opened all the windows. She had wasted no time. As they came down to the first-floor hall, they heard the screech of a siren as the emergency van drew up. In the vestibule, with the doors wide open, stood Cuffy in her red flannel wrapper with the gray tail of hair hanging down her back, and Oliver weeping drowsily in her arms. "We can't wake Randy up!" cried Mona, as Rush, with a grunt of weariness, put Randy on the floor. Very carefully, he put her down. She looked so small and pale and seemed so fast asleep that he felt terribly frightened. Cuffy dropped the howling Oliver and bent over Randy. "She'll be all right once she gets a little air, poor child." The emergency men came in their dark blue uniforms. There seemed to be dozens of them, hundreds of them, thundering up and down stairs. 2 of them worked over Randy. It didn't take long. In about 5 minutes, she opened her eyes. "Rush," she whispered. "Yes, Ran." "What happened?" "Coal gas. Something happened to the furnace, but everything's okay." "I dreamed you and I were going down a long, dark tunnel, like a subway tunnel, only with no cars. Way in back of us, at the end, there was a lighted doorway. You kept saying, 'We ought to go back, we ought to go back.' But I kept saying, 'No, no, we ought to go on.'" This was so extraordinary that Rush could hardly believe it. "I dreamed about that tunnel myself," he told Randy. "Only I saw Isaac in the doorway, and he was really there. He's the one who saved us by barking so loud." "Rush," said Cuffy, "after this, you can keep that dog in your room every night if you want to. He can sleep on the foot of your bed, bury his bones under the living room carpet, leave his muddy paw prints on the woodwork, and anything else he likes. He's a wonderful dog, and no mistake." Out of doors, a little knot of curious people had gathered. The light shone on their wet umbrellas. Willie Sloper pushed his way among them, mounted the steps, and entered. He had a piece of flannel around his neck, and his spiky hair glistened with rain. "Where's your rubbers, Willie?" demanded Cuffy. Willie ignored the question. "What happened?" he whispered strickily. "Was it the furnace?" "Coal gas. I don't know how it happened," replied Rush. "I put coal on the furnace myself, before I went to bed. It left the furnace door wide open, too." "Open!" croaked Willie, almost with his normal voice. "You mean you left it open? Didn't I ever tell you to have to leave that door shut? Some furnaces you leave the door open, some furnaces you leave the door shut. This one you have to leave the door shut. Doggone it, didn't I ever tell you that?" "I don't think so," Rush said humbly. I just thought if you left the door open it would be better. More air and everything. My fault, whispered Willie tragically. Doggone me for a dang old fool. Why, you might have all been suffocated in your beds. Pretty near was, too, and I'd have been to blame. Rush found himself whispering in sympathy. Oh, that's all right, Willie. You probably did tell me, and I forgot. Anyway, I should have known. A fine engineer I'll make. And anyway, we're all okay. Dang old fool, muttered Willie to himself, shaking his head. It was at that moment that Father's taxi drew up. At 3:45 on Sunday morning, he found himself greeted by an emergency van, a crowd of curious onlookers, and a policeman who didn't want to let him go into his own house. When he did go in, he found dozens of other policemen, his entire family in the front hall attired in bathrobes and pajamas, and Willie Sloper, who drifted toward him like a ghost and whispered, It's all my fault, Mr. Melendy. What's all your fault? Cried Father. Why can't you speak up? What are you whispering for? What in the name of heaven is all this? What's been going on? Cuffy explained. Rush explained. Willie explained. Isaac barked. Mona and Randy and Oliver sat in a pale, solemn little cluster on the stairs. That furnace, said Father. Out she goes before the fall. I've stood enough from her. More than enough. Are you sure you're all right? I almost suffocated, said Randy in a stately voice. But you feel all right now? Yes, except my head hurts. Mine does too, said Mona, hoping she looked pale. I feel hungry, Oliver said. Well, said Father, let's all go down to the kitchen and get something to eat. Maybe it'll make us feel better. You come too, Willie. I'll just run down and take a look at the old villainess in the basement. I want to talk to the emergency men for a minute, too. Father ran lightly down the stairs, and the rest followed more slowly. There were rivulets and ponds of water under every window. The rugs were soaked, and the drawing-room curtains hung limp and damp. The house smelled of rain, but it was a good smell. The serpent had been vanquished. Father joined them in the kitchen. Randy, are those your clothes downstairs in the basement? He asked, opening the icebox door. Oh, gee whiz. Yes, they are, Father. What are they doing down there? Even your shoes are tied to the clothesline. Well, I fell into the lake at Central Park this afternoon, began Randy. It all had to be explained. You've had quite a day, haven't you, Randy? Said Father when she had finished. He looked out the window at the retreating, screaming emergency van, and the slowly departing crowd of people who seemed disappointed that there had been no disaster. He looked at his disheveled family, and then he took a cold lamb chop out of the icebox and tossed the whole thing to Isaac. Be it ever so humble, said Father, there's certainly no place like home. And we will pick up with Saturday number 7 next time. Thanks for listening.